Hello everyone, welcome to Norwich Talk for the first video following our rebranding of this YouTube channel. If you haven't already, make sure to go and check out the video announcing the rebrand of the channel. We've got a new logo, a new name, and some new colours to the channel, matching that on my shirt, of course. We're here for a match preview and preferred 11 ahead of Norwich's match tomorrow against Brighton, a game where I just don't know what to expect, and we're going to be going over that in this video here today. So the first thing I'll do quickly is rattle through my starting 11. I'm going to go with Krul in goal, Lewis, Godfrey, Klose and Aarons across the back, of course. Tim Klose now back from his suspension. Teti Vrancic in the middle, a very familiar lineup so far. Buendia, Stiepermann, Hernandez behind Adam Eder. So that is my starting 11 for this game. The first thing I'll say is that I did actually make a video following the Arsenal game. However, it was not a pleasant viewing. I couldn't really get my thoughts together, to be honest with you, because that game frustrated me just such an incredible amount. I think it's probably the most frustrated I've been after a game, which is, it's quite the achievement following games like Southampton and Everton this season so far, especially since Project Restart. However, I didn't really want to upload it because it just wasn't a very good video, and I didn't want to sort of drop the quality on the channel. But what did I make of the Arsenal game in short, quickly? Norwich were terrible. I honestly don't know what to expect from this game following that performance. Going into the Arsenal game, I was feeling fairly positive because of the Man United performance. I thought Norwich were going to raise and maybe meet their performance levels that they raised against Manchester United. However, they've decided to knock it back down again. So going into this game, I honestly, as I'm now saying for the third time, just do not know what to expect. An interesting stat from that game is that we had no shots in the box for the first time under Daniel Farke, which is a massive problem because Norwich's style of football is very much working the ball into the box to shoot, because we don't really like to cross too much, do we? And when you're not doing that in a game, when you're not doing the one thing that got you into this league, that's a big problem. Putting the result aside, I just wanted a better performance from Norwich, and it wasn't. There was about a 10-minute spell after half-time when we were already 2-0 down after a triple substitution from Daniel Farke, where I thought, right, we're going to give it a go. But then Josip Dermich plays a really dodgy back pass to Ben Godfrey, and the game is just dead and buried. Well and truly, the players, I'm not going to say they didn't look like they cared. Their heads were down, and it was just such a whimper of an attempt to get back into the game. But moving on from Arsenal, some things I'm taking from that is that Norwich have continued to lose every single game following conceding the first goal, which is such a shift in mentality from the Championship season that got us into the Premier League, because, we'd concede the first goal or we'd go up and then go behind, but we'd still win the game, and Norwich City just cannot do that in the Premier League, which is the reason we're going down. I didn't expect Norwich this season to take the lead in every single game, but I did expect us to come back a few times, because we were the comeback kings last season, weren't we, as we have been before, but that really hasn't been the case this season. So if we concede first in this game, I'm going to be very worried. Also, we've scored 1 goal in 4 games since the commencement of Project Restart, which is just really, really embarrassing, diabolical, and fairly shameful, given the performance levels as well have matched the stat in front of me. But yeah, Tim Krul in goal, obviously. I no idea what he's thinking against Arsenal, trying to Cruyff Aubameyang, but we'll move on from that because I love Tim Krul. I'm sure we all do after that. Lewis, Godfrey, Klose and Aarons, the back line. 1, because we have no choice, and 2, it would be nice to have Tim Klose back because we really missed him against Arsenal, didn't we? We missed that discipline in the middle. As we have done for most of the season in terms of a dynamic duo in the middle. We've missed a lot of discipline. Obviously, Grant Hanley being injured at the moment, and when he came back into the team before lockdown, I think we conceded more than 1 goal in a game once in 5 or 6 games, which is pretty good for Norwich. I should stress it's good by Norwich's standards. So we have missed that discipline, or we did miss that discipline in the middle of the pitch. Teti Vrancic for me in the middle again. Teti has to be in there for obvious reasons. I'm going to put Vrancic in again. I genuinely do think Daniel Farke might start Mario Vrancic against Brighton, because Kenny McLean against Arsenal just wasn't good enough, and I think that's sort of clear to see. It's nice to see faith being shown in McLean from Farke. It's nice to see faith being shown by a manager. However, there comes a time where you need to sort of puff your chest out and admit, right, maybe he needs a rest and you need to bring Mario Vrancic in. This game for Norwich is going to be so important, because the only way we're going to win this is by scoring goals. I know that sounds stupid, but it really is the way it is for Norwich at the moment. And Vrancic is going to be a big part of that, because without him, we've really lacked that sort of creativity from the back line between the defence and attack. We've just missed so much creativity, as is evident by the fact we've scored 1 goal in 4 games. And I genuinely think think Mario Vrancic will bring the ability to change that and shift the momentum. By no means do I think he's going to get on the ball, run at defenders and change the game in that way, but I think his subtle movements and sort of the way he just brings Norwich together could really help Norwich. He's got a real ability to just sort of get the ball, switch the play, and all of a sudden Norwich find themselves on the front foot, and we've not had that for 4 games since Project Restart started. Christ, that is a mouthful, isn't it? But yeah, Vrancic is a must for me. Now, the attacking 4, I'll call it, was a really tough decision in my mind. I will not lie to you. Hernandez has to start because he came on against Arsenal. He looked bright. He probably looked the brightest out of the players on the pitch. He came on against Man United, did a really good job. I can understand him not starting against Arsenal in terms of, I think Daniel Farke sees him as an impact player. However, given his last 2 performances for Norwich, I think he definitely needs to start. He needs to sort of have that chance to prove himself as a starting player in the Premier League specifically. And I trust him to do well, because going into the season, I wasn't doubtful, but I was a bit worried that he would be one of the players to not adjust, because I think his skills and his tricks are good enough for the Championship, and I question whether they'd be good enough for the Premier League. And in the past 2 games, I think he's proven that he can be a starter for Norwich City by Norwich City standards, although them standards are not too high at the moment. Buendia needs to start for me. For as annoying as he can be in terms of sort of a lack of work ethic sometimes, he's got to be on there because he's Norwich's most creative player. He's just unbelievable on the ball. That's all I'll say about Buendia. He needs to be on the right if Norwich want to have any attacking threat behind Adamida, that is. Marco Stiepermann starts in the middle for me. One, just because I think we need a bit of rotation there. Lucas Rupp sort of worked against Manchester United. He was fairly decent. Didn't really work against Arsenal. I think there needs to be a change there. And given the fact Norwich are at home, I say that in air quotations because, you know, the home advantage doesn't really exist at the moment, does it? I think Norwich need to take the game to Brighton, and a player like Marco Stiepermann would do that. I wouldn't be opposed to Andre Duda starting the game, to be honest with you. However, the one time that Adamida and Marco Stiepermann have played together, which was against Preston, it worked quite well. There were shades of Teemu Pukki in Adamida's performance in terms of the way that he read the game and made the runs, and we know Marco Stiepermann loves to get the ball to his feet and play it through, and I think Adamida could feed off that brilliantly. Also, we need a bit of physicality. Now, the idea behind Lucas Rupp is that Norwich could press a little bit higher, could do a bit more of the dirty work a bit higher up the pitch, and it worked to an extent against Manchester United. It was fairly decent, but it obviously didn't work against Arsenal in the slightest. So I think Marco Stiepermann brings a sort of a different aspect to the game on behalf of Norwich City, of course, in terms of the fact that I think he can hold the ball, he could physically hold men off, and also I think he does have that ability to win a few headers. He's not brilliant in the air given how tall he is, but he will bring that sort of dynamic entity to the game, if you will, in terms of winning the header down to knock it down to either Buendia, Hernandez, Ida, anyone really. It could be back down to Vrancic from a goal kick, something as simple as that, to be honest with you. And also, I just love Marco Stiepermann. I just want to see him have that chance in the Premier League, because if Daniel Farke is going to sort of pay as much faith into Kenny McLean as he has, a player like Marco Stiepermann, who was much better than McLean last season, should get the chance again in the Premier League. Up front for me, Adamida. I wouldn't be surprised if I see Teemu Pukki start. I'm not against Teemu Pukki starting. I think he just needs a rest, to be honest with you, because quite clearly he just looks deflated on the pitch, doesn't he? You can sort of tell by the look on his face that he's quite visibly distraught with his performances. He hasn't been good enough for Norwich lately. I have absolutely no doubts in my mind that Teemu Pukki will bounce back as a player for Norwich. We'll see him play really well in a yellow shirt again. I just think as a professional footballer, he needs just a rest. He needs a chance to just sit back, observe, and sort of fight for his place again. He's been over-relied upon this season, but you know that's something everyone knows. And I could have started Josip Dermic, but am I going to do that? Christ, I am not going to do that. Before lockdown, I was sort of saying Josip Dermic could pose a threat to not pose a threat, but he could be a suitable number 2 to Teemu Pukki in terms of a starting striker. He could be the perfect backup striker. He's not been that. I think since Project Restart, we've seen that perhaps he's not quite cut out for the Premier League. The Championship's a different ball game. I think he could be a good player for Norwich. I did see something from the Revere end which I think suggested him leaving Norwich, which I opposed to massively, because I do think he would suit the Championship a lot more than he has done the Premier League, mainly because the Championship isn't sort of solely focused on technical ability, and you can get away with not having that much technical ability in the Championship than you can in the Premier League, mainly because of the massive difference in level and quality, quite obviously. But I'm going to go with Adamida. As I said, I wouldn't be surprised if Pukki starts, but I think Eder just deserves the chance to just, run at the Brighton defenders, get out there, have a bit of fun. Because from my perspective, relegation is a certainty. I've accepted it, so it seems like a good chance to give Adam Eder a run out in the Premier League, perhaps get him a bit warmer for the Championship next season. Although arguably Daniel Farke, if he was to start Teemu Pukki instead of Eder, it would be fair enough in terms of, I think, starting him in this fashion, in my fashion, would be a very defeatist attitude, and the manager can't really show that, because if he begins to show that, that shows the white flag being waved around, which, never ends well for a manager, so it's a lose-lose in that scenario. A little bit on Brighton. They've had an interesting time since the restart, and not just since the restart, but since they appointed Graham Potter. Obviously, he came in with this philosophy of playing football, much like Daniel Farke, and it's very admirable. He got Swansea playing some really good football. I remember last season watching Swansea at Carrow Road, and I think I've said on this channel before that Swansea team was one of the most impressive teams that I saw at Carrow Road, and if they'd taken their chances, they would have beaten us on the day. In the second half, their performance levels dropped, obviously. And Norwich went on to win the game, but that was very much a sort of champions mentality from Norwich that season. As I said, they've had an interesting time since the restart. They beat Arsenal 2-1 after they injured Bernd Leno, which was a fairly interesting scenario to happen. They drew with Leicester. I know that they missed a penalty as well. I think it was Neil Maupay who missed that penalty. And then they got steamrolled by Manchester United. So they've had an interesting time. A big win, a draw where they could have got something, and that performance against Manchester United, which just wasn't very good. But that at the same time was more just sort of Man United being really, really good. It was Pogba, Fernandes, Rashford, Martial, all on their best. An interesting thing as well is that they beat us back in, I think it was the 2nd of November, I've got here on my notes, and they beat us 2-0 in a game that none of us enjoyed watching at all. I think Tete was playing next to Ben Godfrey that game, and it's one of them games this season where we've had too many of them types of performances. Going into that game, I think there's a podcast with me and Joe that we made. We were feeling very pessimistic, which sort of accumulated into that game in terms of performance from Norwich, and we just got rolled over quite comfortably. I think that was one of the games where I just went mental at zonal marking, to be honest with you. However, that was a very, very long time ago now. An interesting thing from that game is that we had no shots on target. So I am slightly worried. Not because of that, but just because Norwich at the moment don't really like shooting, which is not brilliant, is it really, to be honest with you? But just quickly, I want to praise Brighton and Graham Potter, because one thing that it was in the back of my mind when he was appointed for Brighton was, one, it was a good appointment because quite clearly he's a manager who likes to play football the right way, but I was worried in terms of I didn't think he'd have enough time to sort of shift the culture at Brighton, because obviously they went from Houghton to Potter, which is a massive change, as we know as Norwich fans as well. When we had Chris Houghton, he plays very defensive football, fairly boring at times. It's not the easiest on the eye, but it sometimes gets results. And to shift from that mentality to playing sort of fluid football, more fluid football that is, it takes a real amount of character from the players and the manager, and I was worried for Graham Potter that he wouldn't have enough time to do it in the Premier League before he got it going properly, which is literally what's happened to Norwich this season, which is sort of ironic, so to speak, but he's done a very good job. Brighton 6 points, which is another mouthful, above the relegation drop, so I think that's a massive achievement for him, and in terms of this game, I think Brighton are really going to want to win this one to make a real statement of intent in terms of staying up this season, which I think they'll do. And I think they'll do it comfortably because they play Liverpool in the next game, so I think they're going to want to pick up 3 points here. And when you look at Norwich on paper, this is a game they should probably be winning. I think a lot of teams who will be coming up against Norwich will be licking their lips at the prospect of playing against us, because one, we're rock bottom of the table, fairly far adrift, but also if you actually look at the performances from Norwich lately, they've just really been poor. So I think Brighton will be quite excited to play against this Norwich team. In terms of a score prediction, I don't see Norwich winning. I have no idea what the performance is going to be like. I expect a better performance. That's the thing. My expectation never really wavers in terms of I will watch the game tomorrow and I will expect Norwich to play better. I hope they will. I think they will. I don't see us getting anything out of the game, to be honest with you, but, that comes with my acceptance of relegation. It's not something I fear. And after yesterday's VAR shambles, and I think the West Ham Chelsea's VAR shambles, I will not miss the Premier League. I'm a person who, before VAR, was dead set on the Premier League being miles better than the Championship. I constantly say to my mates that I'd rather be in the Premier League than the Championship. However, this season has proven to me that I don't really like the Premier League. I'd love it if we were successful. If we'd had a good season this season, it would have been a completely different ball game. But I'm a Norwich City fan. It hasn't been very good, and that mixed in with the fact that VAR is somewhat killing the game is just a sort of helps me accept relegation. But we'll make another video on a different day in terms of how I think Norwich will bounce back from that. But yeah. That's everything for this video. As I said at the beginning, make sure you go and check out the rebrand video announcing all the changes on the channel and what to expect from us in the future. Make sure you look in the description box down below for all the socials, Spotify, and the My Football Writer website if you prefer reading or if you'd like to read as well. And I think that's just about everything. So until next time, we'll see you again very, very soon.